The mountain air at Jackson Hole carried the kind of cold that clarified thought. Sharp, honest,
We are not so different,
unforgiving
you
in
and
a way
I.
that only high
Our
altitude
worlds may
could
be
manage.
far apart, but our
The Grand
hearts beat to
Teton
the
Lodge
same
sat
rhythm.
perched against the Wyoming landscape like a declaration of human ambition, all glass and timber, and views that made mortality feel both significant and small. Callum Reed had never been anywhere like this. He stood in the curved driveway watching black cars deposit people who moved with the particular confidence of those who shaped markets rather than participated in them. His own arrival had been significantly less elegant. A shuttle from the airport, a rumpled blazer that fit poorly across the shoulders, a briefcase containing exactly 3 pens, 2 legal pads, and a profound sense that someone in human resources had made a catastrophic error in sending him here. 28 years old, junior research assistant. His entire job description could be summarized as carry things, take notes, remain invisible. He had prepared for invisibility. What he had not prepared for was the woman stepping out of the town car directly in front of him. Evelyn Hartwell moved like weather, inevitable, self-contained. Her hair had gone completely silver, worn in a style that suggested she had stopped caring about vanity around the same time she stopped caring about the opinions of smaller men. She wore black, which could have been mourning or power or both. On her left hand, a wedding ring caught the morning light with a flash that felt almost accusatory. Callum knew who she was, of course. Everyone in the energy sector knew. CEO of Hartwell Energy Corporation, $40 billion in market cap, architect of the largest renewable grid project in the Western Hemisphere. Widow of Graham Hartwell, former ambassador architect of international climate policy, dead 9 months from heart failure that had surprised exactly no one who understood the toll of caring too much about a dying planet. She did not look at Callum as she passed. Why would she? He was furniture, atmospheric, part of the architectural landscape of people who made powerful people more powerful. Inside the lodge had been transformed. What was usually a luxury resort catering to people with too much money and too little imagination had become something else entirely, a temple to negotiation. The main conference hall occupied what had been the grand ballroom, its western wall replaced entirely with glass that framed the Teton Range in a view so aggressively majestic it felt like propaganda for the concept of American exceptionalism. 18 chairs arranged in a perfect circle, no head of the table, no hierarchy, at least not in the seating chart. Hierarchy here was measured in other currencies: wealth, influence, the ability to move billions with a single phone call. Callum clutched his badge in his briefing packet and tried to remember how to breathe like a competent professional. His instructions had been explicit. Chair number 7, auxiliary seating, second ring. Do not speak unless specifically addressed. Do not make eye contact with principals. Do not under any circumstances draw attention. The room was already filling. He recognized faces from cable news, from magazine covers, from the kinds of LinkedIn profiles that made his own look like a child's art project. Harrison Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Energy, consolidated 77 years of oil money, slowly, reluctantly pivoting towards something that might let him sleep at night. Margaret Sinclair, the British CEO who had once told a parliamentary committee that capitalism without conscience was just theft with better PR. Thomas Whitmore, Canadian and polite, in that way that made Americans nervous because they could never tell if they were being insulted. Callum found the second ring of chairs, counted, 5, 6, 7. He sat. The chair was comfortable in that specific way expensive furniture always managed to be. Ergonomic, supportive, designed by people who understood that comfort was a tool for keeping people docile during long meetings where the future was casually redistributed. Except something felt wrong. The chair to his immediate left was larger, heavier. The wooden frame was darker, more ornate. There was no nameplate, but there was an absence, the way a missing tooth creates more presence than the one still intact. Callum looked down at his briefing packet. Chair 7. He was in chair 7, wasn't he? He checked the small brass number riveted to the chair's armrest. 6. His stomach performed a complex maneuver that involved dropping several floors while simultaneously trying to exit through his throat. He had sat in the wrong chair. Not just any wrong chair. The chair. The one reserved for Graham Hartwell, whose absence was the unspoken organizing principle of this entire summit. The chair that was supposed to remain empty as a gesture of respect or memory or whatever protocol governed the seating arrangements of the recently dead. Callum began to stand, slowly, carefully, the way one might try to back away from a sleeping predator. A hand closed around his. It was cool, firm. The grip of someone who had spent decades shaking hands with people who mistook strength for cruelty and had learned to correct that assumption without saying a word. He froze. Evelyn Hartwell had taken the chair to his right, the primary chair. The throne really, though no one would call it that. She had not looked at him. Her eyes were fixed forward on the empty center of the circle, on the space where presentations would soon bloom into proposals, and proposals would harden into policy. Her voice was quiet, pitched for him alone. The acoustics of the room were designed to prevent exactly this kind of private communication, but she had learned, apparently, how to defeat architecture. "Don't get up," she said. "Stay here." 4 words, delivered with the weight of a presidential order and the gentleness of a plea. Callum's brain offered several responses. All of them involved apologizing, explaining, fleeing. None of them made it to his mouth because her thumb had pressed just slightly against the back of his hand, a gesture so small it might have been accidental. Except nothing about Evelyn Hartwell seemed accidental. He stayed. His heart was attempting to secede from his body. His lungs had apparently forgotten their primary function. But his hand remained exactly where it was held in place by a woman he had never met for reasons he could not begin to understand. Around them, the room continued to fill. Conversations in 3 languages, the soft, artificial sound of tablets waking up. Someone laughed, the kind of practiced laugh that suggested they had been trained to find things amusing on command. No one seemed to notice that Callum Reed Jr., research assistant, nobody from nowhere, was sitting in a dead man's chair. Or perhaps they noticed and simply chose not to comment. Perhaps this was a test. Perhaps this was strategy. Perhaps Evelyn Hartwell knew exactly what she was doing, and he was simply a piece on a board whose rules he had not been given. Her hand remained around his, not squeezing, not restraining, just present. A connection that felt less like comfort and more like ballast. Something to keep him weighted when every instinct screamed to float away into the safe anonymity of correct seating. The session was called to order by a woman Callum did not recognize. Mid-50s, Scandinavian accent. The kind of brisk efficiency that suggested she had organized international summits the way other people organize birthday parties. "Welcome," she said, "to the Atlantic Clean Energy Summit. Over the next 12 hours, we will negotiate the framework for an $85 billion investment in renewable grid infrastructure across North America and Europe." $85 billion. Callum's entire student loan debt could have been paid off roughly 4,000 times with that number. The thought made him slightly nauseous. "This project," the woman continued, "was conceived by Ambassador Graham Hartwell 2 years ago. His vision was ambitious. Some said impossible. We are here to determine if vision can survive the architect." It was a diplomatic way of asking whether Evelyn Hartwell could finish what her husband had started, whether grief had made her competent or delusional, whether the company should be trusted to a woman who still wore her wedding ring 9 months after the funeral. Callum felt Evelyn's hand tighten, not dramatically, just a fractional increase in pressure, enough that he noticed, enough that he understood somehow that this was communication. A language of tension and release. She was telling him something, though he did not yet know what. The first presentation began. Graphs, projections, the careful optimism of people trying to make billions of dollars sound like a moral obligation. Callum tried to focus, tried to absorb information, tried to ignore the fact that his hand was beginning to lose sensation from staying perfectly still. Harrison Blackwood spoke next. His voice had the texture of gravel and cigarettes, and men who had spent their careers extracting things from the earth without asking permission. "I knew Graham Hartwell for 30 years.
We are not so
he said.
different, you and I.
Brilliant man,
Our
passionate,
worlds may be far
perhaps too
apart, but our
passionate.
hearts beat to the
This
same
project
rhythm.
assumes technological developments that have not yet materialized. It assumes political will that has historically evaporated the moment it becomes expensive. And it assumes, forgive me, Evelyn, that emotion will not cloud judgment when judgment is all we have." The room shifted, a collective intake of breath. This was the attack they had all been waiting for. Polite, wrapped in condolence. but an attack nonetheless. Evelyn did not respond immediately. The silence stretched. 10 seconds, 20. In a room full of people accustomed to filling silence with their own voices, it was a power move. She was forcing them to sit with discomfort, to wonder whether she would respond at all or simply let the accusation hang. When she spoke, her voice carried no anger. No defense, just a simple, devastating clarity. Graham made mistakes, she said. The Munich project in 2008. He lost $2 billion in the confidence of people who had trusted him. He spent the next 15 years learning from that failure. This project is not a repetition, it is an evolution. And if you cannot see the difference, Harrison, that says more about your capacity to learn than mine. Her hand tightened around Callum's again, harder this time. He could feel her pulse through her palm, quick, controlled, the physiological signature of adrenaline being managed by sheer force of will. Without thinking entirely on instinct, Callum adjusted his grip, not pulling away, not squeezing back, just shifting, redistributing the pressure, grounding rather than restraining. Evelyn's breathing changed, slowed. The tension in her hand eased fractionally. She had not looked at him, had not acknowledged him in any visible way, but something had been communicated, something had been received. The presentations continued. Callum stopped trying to understand the technical details and started watching the people instead. The way Margaret Sinclair leaned forward when renewable storage was mentioned. The way Thomas Whitmore made notes in actual longhand fountain pen on paper. Like a man who did not trust digital records. The way Harrison Blackwood watched Evelyn with the focused intensity of someone conducting an experiment. During the first break, no one approached Callum. He was invisible again except for the fact that Evelyn Hartwell had not released his hand. She stood when the others stood. She accepted a glass of water from an assistant. She nodded at the appropriate moments during small talk. And through all of it, her hand remained in his. A younger executive, someone from Sinclair's delegation, leaned in toward Margaret and whispered something. Margaret's eyes flicked toward Callum, then away. Her expression gave away nothing, but Callum understood the question being asked. Who is he? Why is he sitting there? What does he mean? He wished he knew. When the session resumed, the tone had shifted. The presentations became sharper. Questions became challenges. This was no longer exploration. This was excavation. Everyone in the room was digging, trying to find the flaw, the crack, the reason this would fail, so they could either exploit it or protect against it. A German executive raised concerns about regulatory timelines. A Norwegian pointed out supply chain vulnerabilities. One by one, they presented obstacles that sounded like caution, but felt like sabotage. Evelyn answered each one, not defensively, not emotionally, with numbers, with contingencies, with the kind of preparation that suggested she had spent 9 months doing nothing but anticipating every possible objection. Callum began to understand something. This was not about the project. This was about her, about whether a woman who had lost her partner could be trusted to operate at this level, whether grief was a disqualification or simply another variable to be managed. It was cruel. It was necessary. It was the price of operating in a world where vulnerability was traded like currency. Halfway through the afternoon session, Margaret Sinclair asked the question that had been circling since the beginning. How can we trust a vision built on grief? The room went silent. Even the ambient noise seemed to pause. The ventilation, the soft electronic hum of presentation equipment, everything stopped to hear how Evelyn Hartwell would answer. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she turned finally to look at Callum. It was the first time she had made direct eye contact. Her eyes were gray, or blue, or something between. The color was less important than the weight. She looked at him the way someone might look at a life preserver. Not with desperation, with acknowledgement. With the silent communication of someone who understood that survival sometimes required accepting help from unexpected sources. Then she turned back to Margaret. You cannot, Evelyn said, you cannot trust grief. It is irrational. It is consuming. It makes you do things like sit in a room with people who are actively hoping you will fail just so you can prove them wrong. But you can trust preparation. You can trust 2 years of modeling and stress testing and scenario planning. You can trust that Graham Hartwell spent the last functional year of his life building something that would outlast him. And you can trust that I have no intention of letting his last act be a failure. Her hand squeezed Callum's. Hard, painful almost. He squeezed back, harder than before. Not to hurt, to match, to meet her where she was. Margaret Sinclair nodded slowly. It was not agreement, not yet, but it was acknowledgement, a crack in the wall of skepticism. The session continued for another 90 minutes, technical discussions that blurred into white noise. Callum stopped trying to follow. Instead, he focused on something else. The rhythm of Evelyn's hand. It tightened during attacks, relaxed during neutral moments, trembled just barely when Graham's name was mentioned directly. She was using him as a biofeedback device, a way to regulate herself, to stay present when every instinct probably told her to leave. He had never been useful in this particular way before, had never been needed for something that had nothing to do with his skills or knowledge or credentials. He was useful simply for being there, for staying, for not running when running would have been easier. It was the strangest thing he had ever experienced, and somehow, against all logic, it felt important. As the day session drew to a close, the facilitator announced a 2-hour dinner break. The room began to empty. Conversations continued in smaller clusters. Plans were made for informal discussions over wine and overpriced steaks. Evelyn stood. Her hand finally carefully released Callum's. The absence was immediate. His hand felt cold, light, wrong in a way he had not anticipated. She looked at him properly for the second time. Up close, he could see the exhaustion she had been hiding, the fine lines around her eyes, the set of her jaw that suggested she had been clenching it for approximately 9 months. "I need to ask you something," she said. Callum nodded, not trusting his voice. "Can you stay through the evening session?" It was not an order. It was a request. There was a difference, and she was giving him the option to refuse. "Yes," he said. His voice came out steadier than he expected. "I can stay." Something in her expression softened. Not relief exactly, more like recognition, as if she had been testing whether he understood what she was asking, and he had passed without realizing there was a test. "Thank you," she said. Then she walked away, leaving Callum standing next to an empty chair that suddenly felt heavier than any physical object had a right to feel. He looked around the emptying room, at the mountain view, at the residual evidence of 12 hours that were going to fundamentally reshape how energy moved through continents, at his own hands still tingling from hours of being held. Somewhere in his briefcase, his phone was vibrating with messages he was supposed to answer. Somewhere in the building, his actual supervisor was probably wondering where he had disappeared to. None of it mattered. He had been given a job, not the one he had been sent here to do, a different one, simpler, more complex. He did not fully understand it yet, but he understood enough. He understood that Evelyn Hartwell needed someone to sit beside an empty chair and make it mean something other than absence. And for reasons he could not articulate, he was willing to be that person. Callum did not go to dinner. He remained in the conference hall as staff reset the room, replacing water glasses and adjusting the presentation screen. He sat in chair 6, hands in his lap, now maintaining a careful distance from the empty chair beside him that seemed to radiate absence like a physical force. He thought about his own father, about the industrial accident 2 years ago, faulty equipment that had been reported and ignored, the anger that had consumed him for months afterward, anger at the company, at
We are
the
not so
regulators,
different, you and I.
at his father for not
Our worlds may
refusing
be
to work
far
that
apart,
day,
but our hearts
at
beat to the
himself for
same
not
rhythm.
calling more often, for wasting time they could have had. The anger was still there, probably always would be, but he had learned to make room for other things. Grief, yes, but also the memory of who his father had been, what he had taught him, the way he had believed absolutely that his son would do something important with his life. Callum wasn't sure this qualified as important. Sitting in a chair, holding someone's hand, being present while the world spun and fortunes were redistributed. But maybe importance wasn't always measured in accomplishments. Maybe sometimes it was measured in moments, in connections, in refusing to leave when leaving would be easier. The evening session had a different quality than the afternoon. Something had shifted in the room's atmosphere, subtle as a change in air pressure before a storm. The delegates returned from dinner carrying the careful politeness of people who had spent 2 hours saying things they could not say in official proceedings. Alliances had been tested, weaknesses probed, Everyone came back knowing slightly more than they should. Evelyn arrived 3 minutes after the session was called to order. She wore the same black suit, but something about her bearing had changed. More solid, more certain, as if she had used the dinner break to shore up whatever internal architecture kept her standing. She sat. Her hand found his without hesitation. This time the touch was different, less desperate, more deliberate. She was choosing this connection rather than grasping for it. The distinction mattered in ways Callum was only beginning to understand. The evening agenda was different. Less presentation, more negotiation. They would be working through specific contract language now. The devil's landscape where intentions went to in subclauses and conditional phrasing. Harrison Blackwood spoke first. His voice carried the satisfaction of someone who had spent dinner sharpening knives. "I've been reviewing the Munich project," he said, "the 2008 failure that Graham referenced. I think it's worth examining in detail. Not to embarrass anyone, but to understand pattern recognition, to see if we're repeating mistakes under different names." He projected a document onto the central screen. It was a project post-mortem. 47 pages of technical and financial failure, annotated with the kind of careful cruelty that only hindsight allowed. Evelyn's hand tightened. Callum felt her pulse jump against his palm. "Graham made promises he could not keep," Harrison continued. "He projected technological developments that did not materialize. He assumed regulatory cooperation that evaporated the moment it became politically inconvenient. And most critically, he let his vision override practical reality. The question we must ask ourselves is, are we seeing the same pattern here?" It was a surgical attack, wrapped in concern, delivered with the tone of someone asking difficult questions for everyone's benefit. But the intent was clear: discredit the architect, question the widow's judgment, create enough doubt that the entire project collapsed under the weight of its own ambition. Margaret Sinclair shifted in her seat. Thomas Whitmore made a note in his leather portfolio. No one spoke in Evelyn's defense. This was a test she would have to pass alone. The silence extended. 20 seconds. 30. Callum could feel the tension building in Evelyn's grip. Her breathing had changed, shorter, more controlled. She was managing something just below the surface. Some reactions she could not allow to become visible. When she spoke, her voice was steady, almost gentle. "You're right to raise Munich," she said. "It was a disaster. Graham lost investor confidence, lost political capital, spent years rebuilding trust that he had squandered on a vision that was ahead of its time. He used to joke that he had been right, just unfortunately early. But that's not actually a joke. Being early is the same as being wrong when other people's money is involved." She paused. Her thumb moved against Callum's hand. A small circle. Once. Twice. A self-soothing gesture that she probably did not realize she was making. "But Munich taught him something," Evelyn continued. "It taught him that vision without infrastructure is just fantasy, that technology without policy support is just expensive research, that timing matters as much as innovation. This project is not Munich. This project exists because Munich failed. Every contingency you see in these documents exists because Graham spent 15 years cataloging everything that could go wrong." She pulled up her own tablet, tapped twice. A new document appeared on the central screen. It was a video file, date stamped 11 months ago. The thumbnail showed Graham Hartwell sitting in what appeared to be his home office. He looked thinner than Callum remembered from photographs. Tired, but his eyes carried the focused intensity of someone who knew time was running out and had specific things he needed to say. "I'm going to play something," Evelyn said. "It's personal. I had not planned to share it. But if we're going to discuss Graham's judgment, you should hear from Graham himself." She pressed play. Graham Hartwell's voice filled the room. It was rougher than Callum expected. The voice of someone who had been shouting at the world for decades and was down to his last few shouts. "If you're watching this," Graham said to the camera, "then I didn't make it to the summit. Heart finally gave out probably, or I got hit by a bus, or one of Harrison's lawyers figured out how to kill me with paperwork." A few people in the room smiled despite themselves. Even Harrison's expression twitched towards something that might have been amusement. "I know what you're thinking," Graham continued. "Another old man's vanity project. Another attempt to save the world that will cost billions and change nothing. Munich all over again. And you're right to think that. Munich was a failure. But here's what Munich taught me. He leaned forward closer to the camera. His hands were shaking slightly. Parkinson's maybe, or just age, or the knowledge that this was his last chance to make his case. Munich failed because I thought technology would save us, he said. I thought if we built it, they would come. But technology doesn't change anything if the people who control it don't want change. Munich failed because I ignored politics. I ignored economics. I ignored human nature. This project is different, not because the technology is better, though it is, but because I spent 15 years building the political and economic infrastructure to support it. Every regulatory hurdle addressed, every financial incentive aligned, every political obstacle negotiated in advance. He paused, took a breath that sounded painful. And if I'm gone, Graham said, then Evelyn will know what to do here. He said it simply, a statement of fact, no elaboration, no justification. She's smarter than me, he continued, always has been. I was the dreamer. She was the one who figured out how to make dreams operational. If she's showing you this video, it means she's being questioned. It means someone thinks grief has made her incompetent. And to whoever is thinking that, I want to be very clear. He looked directly into the camera, directly at them. Evelyn will know what to do here. I didn't leave her a plan to follow. I left her a foundation to build on. And if you can't see the difference, that's your failure of imagination, not hers. The video continued. Graham walked through specific technical elements, discussed regulatory frameworks, referenced conversations he had had with people in the room. It was clear this was not a deathbed confession. This was a strategic document. Graham Hartwell had known exactly what he was doing. He had built this video as insurance, as validation, as a message from beyond death that his wife was not only competent, but necessary. The video ended. The screen went dark. The room was silent. Evelyn's hand was shaking now. Callum could feel it through every point of contact. She was holding herself together through pure force of will, and the will was starting to fracture. He interlaced his fingers with hers, not holding her hand anymore, holding hands with her, a partnership rather than support, equal pressure, equal commitment. Evelyn's breathing changed, steadied. The shaking slowed, then stopped. Margaret Sinclair spoke into the silence. That was extraordinarily manipulative, she said. Evelyn turned to look at her, waiting. And also, Margaret continued, extraordinarily effective. I'm in. Just like that. 2 words. A complete reversal of position. Harrison Blackwood leaned back in his chair. His expression was unreadable, which meant he was working through calculations that would take most people hours. We need a break, he said finally. 30 minutes. People need to think. The facilitator
We are not so
called
different,
the break.
you and I.
The room emptied
Our worlds
quickly.
may be far
Only
apart, but
Evelyn
our
and
hearts
Callum
beat to the
remained.
same
She had
rhythm.
not let go of his hand. They sat in silence for 5 minutes. 10. Outside, the darkness was complete now. The glass walls showed them nothing but their own reflection. 2 people sitting in chairs that cost more than most cars, holding hands like teenagers at a movie theater. I need to walk, Evelyn said finally. She stood. Her hand was still in his. Callum stood with her. They left the conference hall through a side door that opened onto a stone terrace. The cold was immediate and shocking. Neither of them had coats. Neither of them cared. The terrace overlooked Jackson Lake. In daylight, it would have been spectacular. In darkness, it was just absence. A void where water should be. The sound of small waves against rock. The occasional call of something nocturnal and unbothered by human drama. Evelyn walked to the railing. Callum stayed beside her. She had released his hand finally, but only because she needed both hands to grip the cold metal of the terrace barrier. He recorded that video 8 months before he died, she said. He knew, or suspected, that something was wrong. That time was running out. Callum said nothing. Some moments required silence more than comfort. I found it 3 weeks ago, Evelyn continued. In his files, labeled insurance. I almost deleted it without watching. Thought it would be too painful, but Graham was never careless with words. If he labeled it insurance, he meant for it to be used. She turned to look at Callum properly. Her eyes were dry, but that made the expression more devastating somehow. Tears would have been easier to witness than this particular species of controlled grief. Do you know what the worst part is? She asked. Callum shook his head. He was right, she said, about everything, the technology, the politics, the timing, even about me, especially about me. And I hate him for it, for being right, for dying before he could be proven right, for leaving me to finish what he started and then having the audacity to tell everyone I could do it. Her voice broke on the last word, just slightly, just enough. I wanted to fail, she said. For the first 3 months after he died, I wanted this project to collapse. I wanted vindication for my anger. I wanted the world to acknowledge that losing him was catastrophic, that things could not just continue, that his absence mattered. She laughed. It was not a happy sound. But the bastard built it too well, she said. The framework held. The partnerships held. Everything he said would work was working. And I realized that failing would be the easy thing, the selfish thing, the thing that would let me stay in grief forever. Callum found his voice. My father died 2 years ago, he said. Industrial accident. Faulty equipment that had been reported and ignored. For 6 months, I was so angry I couldn't function. Angry at the company, at the regulators, at him for not refusing to work that day, at myself for not calling him more often, for wasting time we could have had. Evelyn turned to face him fully. What changed, she asked. Nothing, Callum said. The anger is still there. But I got tired of it being the only thing I could feel. So I made room for other things. The memory of who he was, what he taught me, the way he laughed at his own terrible jokes, the way he believed I would do something important with my life. He paused, looked at the invisible lake, at the darkness that contained an entire landscape they could not see but knew was there. I didn't let go of the anger, Callum said. I just stopped letting it be the only thing. Evelyn studied him for a long moment, evaluating, deciding whether this young man who had accidentally sat in her dead husband's chair had earned the right to speak about loss. Apparently he had. Graham used to say that grief was just love with nowhere to go, she said quietly. I thought it was sentimental nonsense. Turns out he was right about that too. They stood in the cold for another few minutes, neither speaking, just being present while the world spun beneath them, and $100 billion worth of negotiations hung in the balance, and somewhere in that building, 18 people were deciding whether a widow could be trusted with her husband's last vision. Finally, Evelyn straightened, pulled her shoulders back, became once again the woman who commanded rooms. We should go back, she said. Yes, Callum agreed. She started toward the door, then stopped, turned back. Callum, she said. It was the first time she had used his name. Thank you for being here. You asked me to stay, he said simply. I know, but you could have refused, could have found an excuse. People usually do when witnessing something difficult is required. I'm here, Callum said, and I'll stay as long as you need. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Then she did something unexpected. She stepped forward and pulled him into a brief, fierce hug. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. But in those 3 seconds, Callum felt the full weight of what she was carrying. The grief, the pressure, the impossible burden of finishing someone else's masterpiece, while the world watched and waited for her to fail. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright but still dry. Come on, she said. Let's go to prove Graham right one more time. They walked back into the conference hall together. The other delegates were already returning. Conversations paused as Evelyn entered. Eyes tracked her movement. Assessments were made and revised and made again. She walked to her chair with absolute confidence, sat, arranged her tablet, became perfectly composed. Callum sat beside her in chair 6. This time he was the one who reached for her hand. She took it without hesitation, her fingers interlaced with his. Equal pressure, equal partnership. The session resumed. Thomas Whitmore leaned forward in his seat. He had been quiet for most of the day, observing rather than participating. When he spoke now, his voice carried a weight that made everyone else fall silent. I met with Graham 11 days before he died, Thomas said quietly. He asked me to keep something confidential, but I think given present circumstances, he would want me to share it. The room went still. Thomas pulled out his phone, found an email, projected it onto the central screen. It was dated 10 months ago. The subject line read, "If something happens." The body of the email was brief. Tom, if you're reading this, I'm gone, probably heart, Possibly something else. Either way, trust Evelyn. She's stronger than I ever was. Smarter, too. She'll finish this. She won't do it my way. She'll do it better. Make sure everyone knows that. Make sure Harrison knows that. And make sure she knows I always believed in her more than she believed in herself. Graham. Thomas looked up from his phone, looked directly at Evelyn. He sent me that 3 weeks before he died, Thomas said, along with similar messages to 4 other people in this room. He was preparing for his absence, making sure his faith in you was documented, making sure we understood that supporting this project meant supporting you, not just his memory. Harrison Blackwood had gone very still. His expression suggested he was doing complex calculations that were not coming out in his favor. I received a similar message, Margaret Sinclair said. I thought it was paranoia, sentiment. But watching today, I understand. He knew exactly what would happen, how you'd be questioned, how your grief would be weaponized, and he built insurance against it. One by one, 3 other delegates confirmed they had received messages, all with the same theme. Trust Evelyn. Support her. Believe in her capacity to not just continue his work, but improve it. Evelyn sat very still. Her hand tightened around Callum's until it was almost painful. The negotiations continued deep into the night. Contract language was debated, semicolons relocated, defined terms refined until they meant something both specific and flexible enough to survive contact with reality. At midnight, the facilitator called for a recess until morning. Final signatures would happen then. Evelyn finally released Callum's hand. The absence was total and immediate. Come with me, she said. She led him out of the conference hall down a corridor into a small private lounge that had been reserved for VIP guests. It was empty, quiet, the kind of space designed for people who needed to escape the performance of power. Evelyn sat on a leather sofa, gestured for him to sit. He did. For a long moment, she said nothing, just looked at him with an expression he could not quite read, evaluating, deciding. I need to tell you something, she said finally, about Graham, about how he died. Callum waited. The official cause was heart failure, Evelyn said. Stress, age, decades of caring too much about things most people don't
We are
care
not
about
so
at all.
different, you and I.
But 3 months ago,
Our
I
worlds
had
may
his
be
medical
far
records
apart, but our
reviewed by a
hearts beat to the
specialist,
same rhythm.
someone who owed me a favor and could be discreet. She pulled out her tablet, showed him a document, medical analysis, pharmacy records, prescription histories. Someone altered his medication, she said. Changed the dosage electronically in the pharmacy system. Made it look like his doctor had approved it. The change was subtle, just enough to put additional stress on an already compromised heart. It would have looked completely natural, except it wasn't. Callum felt the words land like stones, heavy, inescapable. Who? He asked. I don't know for certain yet, Evelyn said, but I have evidence, access logs, financial incentives. Someone in the energy sector who would benefit enormously from this project failing. Someone who saw Graham as a threat to the status quo and decided to eliminate that threat in a way that couldn't be traced. She looked at him directly, measuring, deciding. I'm telling you this because you're involved now, she said, by sitting in that chair. By holding my hand through all of this, you've become part of this story, and I need you to understand what that means. What does it mean? Callum asked. It means someone killed my husband, Evelyn said, and I'm going to find out exactly who and make sure they face consequences. But not yet. Not while this project is still fragile. First I succeed. I prove Graham was right. I build something so successful that whoever killed him has to watch his vision become reality, has to live with the knowledge that they failed. That murder changed nothing except making me more determined. She reached out, took his hand again. Not for comfort this time, for connection, for commitment. I'm asking you to continue being here, she said. Tomorrow, through the signatures, through whatever comes next. I can't promise it will be easy. I can't promise it will make sense, but I can promise it will matter. Callum looked at their joined hands, at this woman who had buried her husband 9 months ago and was now hunting his killer while simultaneously saving his legacy. At the absurdity of being asked to be part of something so much larger than his training or experience or reasonable expectations. He thought about his father, about dying without seeing your work completed, about the people left behind who had to decide whether to let things end or find the courage to continue. "I'll stay," he said. Evelyn smiled, a real smile this time, exhausted, grateful, determined. "Thank you," she said. They sat together in the quiet lounge, while outside the Wyoming night continued its indifferent rotation, and somewhere in the building, 18 people went to bed believing they had just witnessed something significant, unaware that the real story was still being written by a widow and a witness who had learned that sometimes the most important thing you could do was simply refuse to let go. Morning came to Jackson Hole the way it always did at altitude, sudden, uncompromising, light that demanded attention rather than requesting it. Callum woke in a guest room he barely remembered being assigned, his hands still tingling from 14 hours of holding someone else's grief. The final session was scheduled for 9. 4 hours to formalize what had been agreed upon, to transform handshakes and verbal commitments into legal documents that would govern the movement of $85 billion across continents in decades. He showered, changed into the spare shirt he had packed with the optimism of someone who thought this trip would be unremarkable, put on the same blazer that still fit poorly, looked at himself in the mirror and saw someone different than the person who had arrived 36 hours ago. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Something in his eyes, the set of his shoulders, the knowledge that he had been present for something that mattered, even if he still didn't fully understand his role in it. The conference hall was already half full when he entered. Early arrivals nursing coffee and reviewing contracts with the focused attention of people who understood that the devil lived in semicolons in subordinate clauses. Chair 6 waited for him, no longer terrifying, just necessary. Callum sat. Evelyn entered 10 minutes later. She wore gray today instead of black, a small change that felt seismic. Her hair was pulled back more severely. All business. The vulnerability from last night's conversation had been carefully packed away behind the architecture of professional competence. She sat, did not immediately reach for his hand. Instead, she opened her tablet and began reviewing documents with the kind of focus that suggested sleep had been optional and largely declined. Around them, the room filled. Harrison Blackwood arrived with the same lawyers as yesterday, but something about his demeanor had changed. Less combative, more contemplative. Margaret Sinclair looked fresh despite the late night, which suggested she had mastered the art of functioning on minimal sleep years ago. Thomas Whitmore was the last to enter, carrying what appeared to be an actual briefcase rather than a tablet, because some people still believed in the physical weight of important documents. The facilitator called the session to order. "Today we finalize," she said. "Hi, Cam, I am." Contract language has been distributed. We have 4 hours to address concerns, make final amendments, and execute signatures. At 1 o'clock, this agreement either exists or it doesn't. It was a remarkably binary way of framing the transformation of global energy infrastructure. But accuracy was not always diplomatic. The morning proceeded with the tedious precision of lawyers doing what lawyers did best, finding problems in solutions and solutions in problems. Contract language was debated. Semicolons were relocated. Defined terms were refined until they meant something both specific and flexible enough to survive contact with reality. Callum tried to follow, lost the thread somewhere around indemnification clauses, found it again during a discussion of arbitration procedures, lost it permanently when they began debating choice of law provisions. Evelyn's hand found his 90 minutes into the session, not during a moment of stress, during a moment of waiting. They were in recess while lawyers consulted privately about whether New York or Delaware law should govern certain provisions. Her hand was steadier today, less tremor, more certainty. She had made a decision sometime between midnight and morning. Callum could feel it in the way she held herself, the set of her shoulders, the quality of her attention. The session resumed. Minor victories and minor defeats accumulated in the margins of a document that was now approaching 200 pages of careful language designed to prevent misunderstanding while preserving just enough ambiguity to allow for adaptation. Then just before noon, Harrison Blackwood did something unexpected. He stood, not to make a point of order, to make a speech. "Before we proceed to signatures," he said, "I need to say something about Graham Hartwell, about this project, about what we're actually doing here." The room went quiet. Harrison Blackwood did not make speeches. He made declarations, pronouncements. But speeches implied emotion, and emotion was not his native language. I've spent 50 years in energy, he said. Started in oil fields in Texas. Worked my way up through an industry that made fortunes by pulling things out of the ground and setting them on fire. Got rich doing it. Got powerful doing it. And somewhere along the way stopped asking whether it was the right thing to do. He paused, looked directly at Evelyn. Graham asked those questions, Harrison continued. Asked them loudly, asked them inconveniently. Made a lot of people uncomfortable, myself included. And when Munich failed, I'll admit I felt vindicated. Felt like his idealism had finally crashed into reality and reality had won. Margaret Sinclair shifted in her seat. Others looked uncomfortable. This was not standard summit procedure. This was something else. Confession, maybe, or eulogy. But Graham didn't stop asking questions, Harrison said. He just got better at asking them in ways that had answers, better at building things that could actually work. And I realize now that I spent 15 years hoping he would fail again, because his success would mean admitting I had been wrong. About energy, about what's possible, about what we owe to people who haven't been born yet. He turned to address the full room. This project succeeds, and it proves that profit and principle don't have to be enemies, that you can build something that makes money and makes sense. And that scares the hell out of me. Because if this works, I have to admit, I wasted decades building the wrong things. The silence that followed was profound. The kind of silence that happened when people witnessed someone actually changing their mind in public. It was rare enough to feel almost sacred.
We are not so different, you and
I
I.
want to be clear, Harrison said.
Our worlds may be far apart, but our hearts beat to the same rhythm.
I'm supporting it because Evelyn has convinced me that it can survive without him, that it can evolve beyond his vision into something better. And if she can do that while grieving, while being questioned, while carrying weight that would break most people, then the least I can do is get out of her way and let her work. He sat down. The speech was over. No dramatic conclusion, no call to action, just an old man admitting he had been wrong and choosing differently going forward. Evelyn's hand tightened around Callum's, not from stress, from something else. Recognition, maybe, or the peculiar pain of being seen accurately by someone who had spent years trying not to see you at all. The facilitator cleared her throat. Are there any other statements before we proceed to signature? No one spoke. Then let's finalize the document, she said. The next 30 minutes were procedural, digital signatures, verification protocols, the mechanical process of transforming intention into obligation. One by one, 18 people applied their authority to a document that would govern billions of dollars and decades of implementation. When it came time for Evelyn to sign, she paused. Her hand hovered over the tablet. The stylus suspended in that infinite moment between before and after. Callum felt her hesitation through their joined hands, felt the weight of what she was about to do. This was the moment, the point of no return. Once she signed, she was committed, not to Graham's vision, to her own evolution of it. She looked at the empty chair beside her, at the space where Graham should have been sitting, should have been saying, should have been witnessing his own vindication. Then she looked at Callum, met his eyes directly, a question in her gaze. He squeezed her hand once, gentle, affirming. She signed. Evelyn Ashford Hartwell, her full name. Not just the name she had taken in marriage, but the name she had always carried. The name that would now be attached to something that would outlive them all. The document was complete, executed, real. Applause began, professional, respectful, but genuine. Evelyn stood, released Callum's hand with visible reluctance, accepted congratulations from delegates who approached to shake her hand, to murmur appropriate sentiments, to perform the social rituals that followed significant agreements. Callum remained seated. This was her moment. He was just the witness, the person who had happened to sit in the right-wrong chair at the right time. But Evelyn kept glancing back at him, small looks, brief, checking to make sure he was still there. He stayed exactly where he was. The celebration continued for another 30 minutes. Champagne appeared, though it was barely noon. Toasts were made, photographs were taken. The kind of documentation that would eventually become historical record. Proof that this had happened. that these people had been here, that something had changed. Through it all, the empty chair remained, conspicuous in its absence. No one sat in it, no one moved it. It had become something else now, not a seat, a memorial, a reminder that some absences were too significant to ignore or fill. During the champagne toast, Evelyn's tablet buzzed. She glanced down, angled the screen away from casual observation. Callum, still beside her, caught the slight change in her breathing. It was an email from a name he didn't recognize. The subject line, Hartwell Investigation, Final Report. She opened it, read silently. Her expression didn't change, but her free hand, the one not holding champagne, curled into a fist. "What is it?" Callum asked quietly. "Evidence," she said. "Definitive. The investigator found the electronic trail, pharmacy access logs, financial transfers, an energy executive from a European consortium, someone who stood to lose billions if this project succeeded. Enough to prosecute. What are you going to do?" Evelyn looked at the celebrating room. At Harrison Blackwood actually laughing with Margaret Sinclair. At Thomas Whitmore raising his glass toward Graham's empty chair. At 18 people who had just committed $85 billion based on trust that she had earned. "Nothing," she said. "Not yet. This summit succeeds first. The contract becomes ironclad. The project launches. Then I hand this to the FBI and let justice be slow and thorough and federal." "Why wait?" "Because Graham would want the work to matter more than the revenge," Evelyn said. "And because the person who killed him needs to watch me succeed first. Needs to believe they got away with it. Needs to sleep well for a few more months. Then they'll never sleep again." It was cold, calculated, and absolutely right. "Also," Evelyn added, looking at the email again, "the investigator confirmed something else. Graham knew. 3 weeks before he died, he suspected something was wrong with his medication. He documented it, left notes. He knew someone was trying to kill him, and he chose not to stop them." Callum felt the words hit like a physical blow. Why? Because stopping them would have meant going public, would have meant investigations and delays and this project dying in the chaos. So he chose to finish the work instead, chose to die so the project could live. Her voice was steady, but Callum saw the tremor in her hand, the way she had to grip the champagne glass harder to keep it from shaking. "That's why I can't fail," Evelyn said quietly. "He traded his life for this. The least I can do is make sure the trade was worth it." Finally, the room began to empty. Delegates departed with their lawyers and assistants. Flights to catch, empires to run. Lives that continued despite the significance of what had just occurred. Evelyn returned to her chair, sat heavily. The performance was over. The mask could come off. "It's done," she said. "Yes," Callum agreed. Graham would have hated the contract language. Too conservative. Too many escape clauses. But he would have signed it anyway. Yes, he would have. They sat in silence. The conference hall was empty now, except for staff beginning to reset the room for whatever came next. Another summit, another negotiation. The space had no memory, only purpose. "Thank you," Evelyn said finally, "for being exactly what I needed without knowing what that was." "What happens now?" Callum asked. "Now I build this thing," Evelyn said. "Spend the next decade making sure Graham was right, making sure his sacrifice mattered. And you go back to your regular job and try to explain to your supervisor why you disappeared for 2 days and came back different." "I could help," Callum offered, "with the project. I'm just a research assistant, but I could—" "No," Evelyn interrupted, gently but firmly. "You have your own life, your own work. What happened here was extraordinary. Lightning strike. Wrong place, right time. But extraordinary can't become ordinary. It breaks if you try to sustain it." She was right. Callum knew she was right. But the knowledge didn't make the dismissal easier. "However," Evelyn continued, "I will need a chief strategy officer eventually. Someone who understands that sometimes the most important strategy is just being present. If you're interested in a year or two, when you've built your own resume and established your own credibility, call me." She handed him a business card. Real paper. Embossed. The kind of formality that was rapidly becoming obsolete but still carried weight. Evelyn Ashford Hartwell, CEO. a phone number, an email address. "I'll call," Callum said. "Good." They stood, walked toward the exit together. The Grand Teton Lodge was already preparing for checkout. Luggage in lobbies, cars being summoned, the infrastructure of departure. At the main entrance they paused. The mountains were brilliant in midday sun, snow and stone and sky combining into the kind of vista that made human concerns feel appropriately small. "Can I ask you something?" Callum said. "Yes." "Why did you grab my hand yesterday when I tried to stand up? You could have just let me go, found someone appropriate to sit there." "Why me?" Evelyn looked at him for a long moment, deciding how honest to be. "Because you were terrified," she said finally, "sitting there shaking, completely out of your depth. And I thought, here's someone who understands what it feels like to be in the wrong place, to not belong, to be surrounded by people who have every reason to doubt you. And I needed to be near someone who understood that, even if you didn't know you understood it." She smiled, sad but genuine. "Also," she added, "you didn't immediately try to
We are not
comfort
so
me.
different, you and
You
I.
didn't say everything would
Our
be
worlds may
okay.
be far apart,
You
but our
didn't
hearts
perform
beat to the
sympathy.
same rhythm.
You just stayed." And that was what I needed. A car pulled up, her a car. A driver emerged to handle luggage that staff had already loaded. "This is me," Evelyn said. "Safe travels," Callum replied. She moved toward the car, then stopped, turned back. "Callum," she said, "what you did sitting in that chair, being present through all of it that mattered. You might not know how much, might never fully know, but it did. Remember that." Then she got in the car and was gone. Callum stood in the driveway for a long time after. Other cars came and went. Other people departed. The summit was over. Everyone was returning to their regular lives. He looked at the business card in his hand, put it carefully in his wallet. The shuttle to the airport arrived. Callum got in, watched the Grand Teton Lodge disappear in the rear view, watched the mountains recede into distance. His phone buzzed, a message from his actual supervisor. 3 missed calls, an email with the subject line, "Where are you?" He would deal with that soon. Invent an acceptable excuse? Return to being appropriately invisible. But first he pulled out the business card one more time. Read the name. Evelyn Ashford Hartwell. The full name. The name she had reclaimed. He thought about Graham, dead 9 months, who had built something knowing he wouldn't see it completed. Who had trusted his wife to finish what he started. Who had been right about technology and politics and timing, and most of all about the woman he married. Who had chosen to die so his work could live. He thought about the empty chair, about absence that became presence through acknowledgement rather than denial. And he thought about his own father, about loss that never fully healed, but could be honored by continuing, by being present, by refusing to let death have the final word. The shuttle merged onto the highway. Jackson Hole disappeared behind them. But Callum carried something with him now, a memory of 2 days when he had accidentally become necessary, when his presence had mattered in ways that had nothing to do with his qualifications or experience or anything he had earned. He had mattered simply by being there, and someday when Evelyn Hartwell called, he would show up again. 8 months passed. Callum returned to his regular life with the surreal sense of having visited another dimension where the rules were different and nothing he had learned there quite applied to the world he now inhabited. His supervisor had been surprisingly understanding about his disappearance, perhaps because the project Callum had accidentally become involved with was now making international headlines. The Hartwell-Ashford Initiative broke ground on its first major installation in March, a renewable grid hub in Colorado that would power 2 million homes. The ceremony was covered by international media. Evelyn Hartwell gave a speech about vision and partnership and the courage required to finish what others started. Callum watched on a live stream from his small apartment in Boston, ate takeout that had gone cold while he was absorbed in the speech. Evelyn wore gray, not black. Her wedding ring was gone, though Callum noticed she wore a different ring on her right hand. Something new, something chosen. In the front row of the ceremony, an empty chair sat beside the podium. No one sat in it. No one needed to explain it. Everyone understood. The months had been productive for Callum. He had finished his research project ahead of schedule, published 2 papers, been accepted into a doctoral program at MIT, built the kind of resume that looked impressive on paper, even if he knew the real transformation had happened in a conference room in Wyoming where none of his credentials had mattered. He thought about calling the number on the business card often, practiced what he would say, rehearsed casual versions and professional versions and honest versions, where he simply admitted that he missed being part of something that mattered. But he never made the call. Evelyn had been clear. Build your own credibility first. Don't try to sustain the extraordinary. So he waited. On a Tuesday in early November, his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Mr. Reed? Evelyn's voice. Formal, professional, but with an undertone he recognized instantly. I'm calling to offer you a position. Chief Strategy Officer, Hartwell Ashford Initiative. You'd be reporting directly to me. Callum set down the research report he had been reading, closed his laptop, gave this moment the attention it deserved. I haven't finished my doctorate, he said. I'm still just... You sat in the wrong chair and stayed when leaving would have been easier, Evelyn interrupted. That's the only credential that matters for this position. Everything else you can learn. The ability to be present when presence is what's needed, that you either understand or you don't. He thought about Graham's empty chair, about 14 hours of holding someone's grief while the world watched, about learning that witness was a form of strength. When do I start? He asked. Monday, if you can relocate that quickly. I can. Good. Her voice softened slightly, became less CEO, more the woman who had held his hand through the hardest day of her professional life. And Callum, thank you for being ready when I called. Thank you, he replied, for calling. There was a pause, a moment of shared understanding that spanned 8 months and 2,000 miles. There's something else you should know, Evelyn said. About Graham, about what I told you in Jackson Hole. Callum waited. The FBI made an arrest last week, she said. The European executive I suspected. They found everything, the pharmacy access, the financial trail, the communications planning Graham's death. It's going to trial in the spring. How do you feel about that? Relieved, Evelyn said, and also somehow empty. I spent 8 months imagining this moment, thinking justice would feel like vindication. But mostly it just feels sad. Graham is still gone. Justice doesn't change that. No, Callum agreed, but it honors him, makes sure his death wasn't just accepted as inevitable. Yes, Evelyn said quietly. Yes, it does. Another pause. I'll see you Monday, she said. Monday, Callum confirmed. He hung up, looked at his small apartment, at the life he'd built in the 8 months since Jackson Hole. Research papers, academic conferences. The safe, predictable trajectory of someone who stayed invisible. That person was gone now. Had been gone since the moment he chose not to stand up from chair 6. Monday he would begin again. Not as the junior research assistant who had accidentally witnessed something profound. As someone who understood that the most important thing you could do was be present when presence mattered most. He pulled out his wallet, found the business card he'd carried for 8 months. He wouldn't need it anymore. On Monday, they'd be colleagues, partners in finishing what Graham had started and Evelyn had transformed into something that would outlast them both. Monday arrived with a particular anxiety of first days. New city, new apartment, hastily rented sight unseen. New job that came with a title that felt too large for someone who still thought of himself as a junior research assistant who had gotten extraordinarily lucky. The Hartwell Ashford Initiative headquarters occupied 3 floors of a building in downtown Denver, close enough to the Colorado installation to allow for regular site visits. The office was modern but not ostentatious. Glass and clean lines, and the kind of purposeful design that suggested the money was going into the work rather than the workspace. Callum arrived 15 minutes early, was met by an assistant who seemed unsurprised by his existence, which suggested Evelyn had prepared people for his arrival. He was given a badge, a brief tour, an office that was larger than his entire previous apartment. Mrs. Hartwell will see you at 9, the assistant said. Conference room C. Callum spent the intervening 20 minutes trying not to panic, reviewing documents on the shared drive, attempting to absorb 8 months of project development in 20 minutes, failing comprehensively. At 9 exactly, he walked to conference room C. Evelyn was already there. She stood by the window looking out at the Denver skyline. She wore gray again. It seemed to be her color now, a conscious choice to exist between mourning and moving forward. She turned when he entered, smiled. It was genuine and tired, and carried the weight of 8 months spent building something that might actually change the world. "Callum," she said, "welcome." "Thank you for the opportunity," he replied. It sounded too formal, too rehearsed. "Sit," she said, "please." He sat. She sat across from him. There was a table between them now. Professional distance, appropriate hierarchy. Nothing like the intimacy of holding hands through 14 hours of negotiations.
We are not so
"I need to be
different, you and
honest
I.
with you," Evelyn said.
Our worlds may be
"About
far
why I
apart, but
hired
our
you.
hearts beat
It's
to the
not
same
just
rhythm.
because you were present in Jackson Hole, though that matters. It's because you understand something that most people in this industry don't." "What's that?" "That sometimes the work is more important than being right," she said. Graham spent 15 years learning that lesson. Spent Munich being brilliantly, catastrophically right too early. Then spent the next 15 years learning how to be right at the right time, how to build infrastructure for ideas, how to make vision operational. She pulled out a folder, slid it across the table. "This is the real project," she said. "Not just the Colorado installation, the full vision. 20 installations across North America, 50 across Europe and Asia. A complete transformation of how energy moves through the developed world. It will take 30 years, cost over $1 trillion, require political will that doesn't currently exist." Callum opened the folder, saw schematics and timelines and projections that made the Jackson Hole Agreement look like a pilot program. "Graham designed this," Evelyn said, "but he knew he wouldn't live to see it completed. Knew I wouldn't either. This is a multi-generational project, something that will outlive everyone in this room and everyone who signs on to build it." She leaned forward, intense, focused. "Your job," she said, "is to make sure it survives beyond us, to build the institutional knowledge, to create the systems that allow this work to continue when I'm gone, and you're gone, and everyone who remembers why we started is gone. To be the keeper of the vision while also being willing to evolve it." It was the most ambitious job description Callum had ever heard. "I don't know if I can do that," he said honestly. "Neither do I," Evelyn replied. "But in Jackson Hole, you sat in a chair you weren't supposed to sit in and stayed when leaving would have been easier. You were present when presence was all that mattered. And that tells me you understand something essential." "What?" "That the most important moments in life are not accomplishments," Evelyn said. "They're connections. They're choosing to be present when absence would be simpler. They're holding someone's hand through the hardest thing they'll ever do and not needing to be thanked for it." She stood, walked to the window, looked out at Denver spreading beneath them. "Graham used to say that grief was just love with nowhere to go," she said. "I've been thinking about that a lot, about where that love goes when the person is gone. And I think this is where it goes, into work that matters, into building things that outlast us, into making sure the people we loved aren't defined by their absence, but by what they made possible." She turned back to Callum. "That's what I'm asking you to do," she said. "Take the love that has nowhere to go and build it into something permanent. Make grief operational." Callum thought about his father, about 2 years of carrying loss, about learning to transform anger into purpose. "I'll try," he said. "Good," Evelyn replied. "That's all anyone can do." The first week was overwhelming. Callum met teams, reviewed budgets, sat through presentations about regulatory frameworks and supply chain logistics and political strategies across 17 different jurisdictions. His brain felt simultaneously too full and completely inadequate, but he also felt something else: purpose, the sense that he was part of something larger than himself, that his presence mattered not because of what he knew, but because of how he chose to show up. On Friday afternoon, Evelyn called him to her office. "There's something I want to show you," she said. She led him down to the building's first floor, to a space that had been converted into something between a museum and a memorial. Photos lined the walls. Graham Hartwell, at various stages of his career, shaking hands with presidents, speaking at conferences, standing in front of renewable installations that had seemed impossible until they existed. In the center of the room, a single chair, empty, the same chair from Jackson Hole, or one identical to it. "I had it brought here," Evelyn said, "after the summit. I wanted a reminder that absence can be honored without being filled, that some spaces are meant to remain empty. Callum looked at the chair, remembered the weight of sitting beside it, the sensation of Evelyn's hand in his. The 14 hours of learning that witness was a form of strength. I also wanted to tell you something, Evelyn said, about the trial, about the person who killed Graham. Callum turned to face her. The prosecutor offered me a chance to make a victim impact statement, she said, to tell the court what Graham's death cost, what was taken from me, from the world. Did you do it? Yes, Evelyn said, but not the way they expected. I didn't talk about my loss. I talked about Graham's choice. She pulled out a piece of paper, a printed copy of her statement. I told them that Graham knew, she said, knew someone was trying to kill him, knew his medication had been tampered with, and he chose to continue anyway, chose to finish his work even though it meant dying, because he believed that the project mattered more than his individual life. Her voice was steady, but Callum saw the effort it took. I told them that killing Graham didn't stop anything, Evelyn continued. It just transferred the work to someone who was more determined, more angry, more willing to spend the rest of her life making sure his death meant something. I told them that the defendant didn't just kill a person. They created a legacy. They made Graham's work immortal by trying to end it. She looked at Callum, met his eyes directly. And I told them about Jackson Hole, she said, about a young man who sat in the wrong chair and stayed because staying mattered, about learning that the most powerful response to death is not revenge. It's continuation. It's being present. It's refusing to let absence be the final word. Callum felt something shift in his chest, understanding maybe, or recognition. The defendant was convicted 3 days ago, Evelyn said, 25 years, federal prison. They'll die there probably. And I feel nothing about it. No satisfaction, no vindication, just the knowledge that justice was done, and now I can focus entirely on the work. She folded the paper, put it away. That's what I wanted to tell you, she said, that this part is over. The grief, the anger, the need for justice, it's done, and now we build. They stood together in front of the empty chair, two people who had learned that absence could be honored through presence, that loss could be transformed into legacy, that the most important thing you could do was simply refuse to let go when letting go would be easier. Thank you, Callum said, for calling me, for trusting me with this. Thank you, Evans replied, for answering. 6 months later, the Hartwell Ashford Initiative announced its expansion into Asia. 3 new installations, partnerships with governments that had been skeptical, a timeline that extended the project another decade. Evelyn gave the press conference. Callum stood in the background, doing what he did best, being present, being witness, being the person who stayed. After the press conference, they returned to headquarters, to the room with the empty chair. We should talk about succession planning, Evelyn said. I'm 63 now. I have maybe another decade of active leadership before age becomes a liability rather than an asset. I'm not ready to replace you, Callum said. No, Evelyn agreed, but you will be. And when you are, I need to know that you understand what this work is actually about. What is it about? It's about proving that human beings can build things that outlast them, Evelyn said, that we can create systems and institutions that survive beyond individual lives, that death doesn't have to be the end of work. It can be a transfer of responsibility. She walked to the empty chair, placed her hand on its back. Graham built this project knowing he wouldn't see it completed, she said. I'm building it knowing I won't see it completed. And someday you'll build it knowing you won't see it completed. And that's the point. The work is larger than any of us. That's what makes it worth doing. Callum understood then, truly understood. This was not about renewable energy or grid infrastructure or even saving the planet. This was about creating something permanent in a world of impermanence, about building meaning that survived mortality. I have one condition, Callum said. When I eventually take over, when you decide it's time, yes. We keep the chair, he said. We keep it empty. We add another one for you when the time comes. We make absence visible. We honor the people who made this possible by acknowledging they're not here anymore. Evelyn smiled, a real smile, relieved, grateful. Yes, she said, that's exactly right. 10 years later, Evelyn Ashford Hartwell retired. She was 73, still sharp, still capable, but she had learned when to transfer responsibility rather than cling to control. Callum Reid became CEO at 38, young for the position, but carrying a decade of experience building something that mattered. At his inauguration ceremony, two empty chairs sat on the stage, one for Graham, one for Evelyn, though she was in the audience alive and well and watching with quiet pride. Callum gave a speech about legacy and continuity and the courage required to build things that would outlive you, about learning that the most important work was not what you accomplished, but what you made possible for others. After the ceremony, Evelyn approached him. "Thank you," she said, "for finishing what I started, what Graham started, what will continue long after both of us are gone." "Thank you," Callum replied, "for teaching me that presence is more powerful than accomplishment. That witness is a form of strength, that sometimes the most important thing you can do is sit in the wrong chair and refuse to leave." They stood together, two people who had learned that grief was just love with nowhere to go, and that the answer was not to stop loving. The answer was to build something worthy of that love, something permanent, something that would outlast them all. The empty chairs remained on stage, silent, present, honored, and the work continued. Because that was the point. The work always continued. That was how you honored the dead. Not by filling their absence, but by acknowledging it, by sitting beside it, by building something so permanent that their loss became part of a larger story. A story about human beings who learned to create meaning that survived mortality. A story about love that found somewhere to go. A story about refusing to let death have the final word. The Hartwell-Ashford Initiative would continue for another 70 years, eventually transforming global energy infrastructure exactly as Graham had envisioned. Callum would lead it for 32 years before transferring leadership to someone else who understood that the work was larger than any individual life. When he died at 78, a third empty chair was added to the memorial room, and the work continued because presence was stronger than absence, because witness mattered more than accomplishment, because sometimes the most important thing you could do was sit in the wrong chair and stay there when everyone expected you to leave. That was the story. That was the legacy. That was how love found somewhere to go when grief took everything else away.